After my review of Tim Burton's 1989 Batman, many people asked me to take a look at the Dark Knight trilogy in 4K. I very much enjoyed the films, but the best news of all is that these transfers have retained the detailed, saturated, filmic look. HDR at its best, perhaps. If you remember my Batman review, I included the teaser trailer that came out prior to the film's release to prove that Michael Keaton was the right man for the role. Well, after that YouTube video was uploaded and a few people have seen it, Stephen Horn got in touch because he was very interested in actually getting a scan of that trailer in 4K. The result was that a few days later, the film was collected, it went off to a lab, and several days later it arrived back here, complete with a hard drive, with every frame on that hard drive. And I can tell you that each frame is almost 50 megabytes in size. So if you think about this, just under 50 megabytes, 24 times a second. Do the maths on how much that will be in a feature film. So these films, when they're scanned, the digital equivalents are enormous. So imagine the compression that goes into creating one of these 4K discs or even a Blu-ray disc. So it just shows really how extra special film is, and it is amazing how the quality does shrink down onto video. I won't tell you how much it cost Stephen to get that transfer done, but I will tell you that it's certainly not a cheap process. So I can only imagine how much it must cost to get a feature film scanned, and after that the studio still has to do all the grading and get everything ready for these disc releases or indeed a release to the cinema. Batman Begins was the least successful of the three films. It had a budget of $150 million and the worldwide gross at the box office was $313 million. So as we'll see, the two sequels to this were far more successful. This one was shot entirely on 35mm. It was predominantly anamorphic 35, but there was also apparently Super 35, which, if I'm right, was used for the special effects shots, but I'm sure someone will correct me if that was not the case. The picture quality is excellent, as is the DTS-HD 5.1 sound. All three of these films have got DTS 5.1. Now, The Dark Knight is even better to look at than Batman Begins, and that's because Christopher Nolan and his team introduced genuine 70mm IMAX sequences into this film, and anyone who's seen genuine IMAX at a genuine IMAX theatre with a 1:43:1 image ratio knows that IMAX is something very special indeed, and not to be mistaken with a lot of these local IMAX theatres that are projecting video. Always make sure you are going to a genuine IMAX theatre and check their screening of film before you set out. Now, the IMAX on here is actually cropped down to 1:78:1, and the reason for that is because predominantly these films were shot 2:35:4:1, and so when you're watching it on a home video, if you were to go to the original IMAX ratio, you'd have a 1:43:1 box in the middle of the screen, and that might be a bit distracting. So I think the sensible thing to do with IMAX sequences on these 16:9 frames is to go from the letterbox 2:4:1 all the way up to the, well, 16:9 image ratio essentially, and that's less distracting than if they were to suddenly have black bars at the side and a little box image like we used to have television, which is 1:33:1. But these IMAX sequences do start out at 1:43:1, and I believe the only place you're going to see those, apart from the odd video release such as the latest Batman vs Superman, they crop those down so that you see the whole IMAX frame in the middle of the screen. That might be a little distracting, but I'm pretty sure the image quality will overall be even better. Now, the majority of The Dark Knight was shot in anamorphic 35mm, but there was also some VistaVision in this, and I think they'd taken a look at Batman Begins and they'd thought that Super 35 for the special effects, if I'm right, could be replaced by VistaVision to retain that exceptional quality and would match up with the IMAX sequences a lot better. So I think that's why VistaVision was used, and anyone who goes through the extras thoroughly, I'm sure, will be able to confirm that. But historically, that's what VistaVision has been used for since Star Wars: A New Hope in 1977 reintroduced VistaVision to the world. This film was a massive hit. an estimated budget of $185 million and a worldwide gross at the box office at over $1 billion. It was a huge money earner for Warner Brothers, and of course, particularly when these first two films were made, there was still a massive home movie disc market to take into account. I felt there was a bit of a James Bond influence in this at times. Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne, and of course the ever brilliant Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox, and between them it seemed to be Bruce Wayne was James Bond and Lucius Fox might have been Q, and the interaction between the two when they're looking at the gadgets and what to do next, it really did have the James Bond feel to it to me. And I suppose it's no coincidence, if I'm right, that a few years later Christopher Nolan would make the brilliant Tenet, which I'm sure many people have been confused by since it came out last year. But how about the makers of the James Bond films give Christopher Nolan a film to make in the future? And how about if they were to film most of it on genuine IMAX? Now that really would be something to look at. Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker is of course very different to that of Jack Nicholson in the 1989 film, and with my love of that film and also the Batman comics when I was growing up, it's going to take me a bit of getting used to, but I'm sure when I see this film again I'm going to enjoy it even more. But my perception of it is that I preferred Batman Begins on this first viewing to The Dark Knight, and I know that goes against the grain of what most people think, but that's just my opinion, and I'm sure others will disagree with me. And so it was interesting that people had generally told me they felt that The Dark Knight Rises was the weakest of the three films. Maybe it's all down to expectations, but I was expecting Dark Knight to be the runaway success and the one I'd enjoy the most, and The Dark Knight Rises to be my least favourite. Well, in actual fact, I enjoyed The Dark Knight Rises more than the other two. My wife was the same. When we stopped for our tea break after a couple of hours, put the kettle on, you know, the usual English thing, we both agreed that we were enjoying this third film more than the other two, and I think that's more because it's character driven than anything, and it doesn't actually rely on the Batman character so much. So the other cast members, in fact through all three films, what a great cast in all three, and that is really the strength of these films. But particularly in this third film there was so much to it, so much more going on, and I felt the characters were better defined and stronger, and I actually thought the villains in this were better. And I particularly enjoyed the Catwoman, who in the comics Batman and Bruce Wayne really does have a relationship with. And if I remember correctly from about 40 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago actually when I read it, I think in one of the comics Bruce Wayne actually marries her. But another strength of these films is the special effects. Now, if you're like me, you're watching these fantastic effects and you're thinking you're watching computer-generated images. Well, they merged the best of both worlds in this, and they filmed as much practically, even things you wouldn't think were possible to film, such as that bat wing that does things that a Harrier jump jet can do. They actually built one of those, and they had it being carried through the sets on cranes, on trucks, and chasing the other trucks. And I thought for sure I was watching a CGI effect, but why was it so good? Well, they filmed it practically and then they finished it off in a computer. So it merged the best of both worlds, and it just makes one heck of a difference. About a third of this film was shot in IMAX and it looks sensational, but the 35mm anamorphic and the VistaVision shots aren't embarrassed, they look pretty fabulous too. It had an estimated budget of $230 million and it took at the worldwide box office nearly $1.1 billion. My preference may still be for Tim Burton's 1989 classic, but these films were a very welcome surprise. I think the last film is the best of the three, and in particular with all that IMAX imagery in it, it's got to be the best image quality of the three, but they all look pretty spectacular, and the sound on them all is equally as good. This box set cost me a penny short of £40 in our most recent trip to HMV, and I think it's worth every penny. Now, some people won't care for the Batman, so I suppose these films aren't for you, but anyone who likes superhero films, I think you're going to love this set if you haven't got it already, and in that regard, they're highly recommended from me. One last thing to talk about is that I like to see people doing well, and particularly I like to see young people doing well, and in this regard Leon at Leon Talks Film, who took a bit of a break from the pressures of YouTube recently, he's got back in the saddle and he came back with that fabulous review he did of Apocalypse Now, and it's great to see him back smiling and going at his film reviews with such enthusiasm once more. Now, I was contacted by another youngster recently, a youngster who I think is in Australia, and he was asking for some advice because he wasn't really getting much attention for his efforts on film reviews on YouTube. So I took a look at a couple of his reviews and I gave him a few pointers, and I suggested he had a go at a review of Apocalypse Now. Now, Clark looks really young to me, and I warned him it's not really a film that youngsters might understand. I certainly didn't when I was his age. But anyway, he picked up the 4K of Apocalypse Now, and I'll point you to his video in the description. See what you think. I think he's going to be worth watching to see how he develops over the years. So I think I'm going to enjoy seeing how you develop, Clark, and best of luck with it. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end, so if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and perhaps consider subscribing so I'll be encouraged to create even more content like this again in the future. Until the next video, bye-bye for now.